Cries of Redemption discusses sensitive topics, including sexual abuse, trauma, and mental health struggles. Listener discretion is advised. If you find any topics disturbing, please prioritize your well-being and step away if needed. While this podcast is rooted in faith and biblical truth, I understand that healing looks different for everyone. Whether you share my faith or not, you are welcome here. My goal is to uplift and support you on your journey. This podcast is meant to offer encouragement and support, but it is not a replacement for personal counseling or therapy. If you are struggling, I encourage you to seek help from a licensed mental health professional. Cries of Redemption is listener supported. If this podcast has encouraged you or helped you in any way, your support helps keep this space going. Thank you so much for being here. Hello, everyone. This is Janelle Starkey, and thank you for joining me today on Cries of Redemption podcast, where every cry finds hope and healing. In the previous episode, I talked about how one day there was a large crowd that gathered outside the White House to protest. I talked about how people lined up along the fence holding signs and shouting over one another. I mentioned how there was a silent group of people standing across the street holding up a sign, which led to the topic, the most offensive word today, sin. Now, in the previous episode, I wouldn't be surprised if people thought that I was a part of that silent group holding up the sign, telling everyone what they were doing and wanting and desiring was sin. But in this episode, I'm here to tell you that I'm a part of the story of the woman wanting to do whatever she wanted with her own body. First of all, we're talking about women's rights and their rights to their body, their autonomy. It's about personal freedom, protection from harm, and equality in decision making. So when it comes to a woman wanting to use the free will that God gave us to do what she wants with her body, it is not a sin. Now, if you go quote me exactly as I said it. And don't try to add or take away or change what I said, because what I said is the truth. But what I noticed is when we talk about women's rights or them wanting to be able to do whatever they want with their body, a lot of times religious people will automatically turn their hearts and minds to the thought of abortion and contraceptions. And when they do that, they do it only on a surface level, not really thinking about the whole picture and only thinking about one thing. You're a murderer. You're killing an innocent child. You're stopping your body from doing what God intended it to do. And every time they do that, they don't realize that they're just playing into the enemy, trying to make everything look negative. Before even knowing someone's situation, they're very quick to point and judge. First, let's try to understand why many women today strongly value control over their own bodies to begin with. And I say try because I know a lot of people will still reject my words and still refuse to understand because they tend to be stuck into their own boxed-in ideology. It helps us to look at how women were treated historically, and I choose to go to the Bible. Let me go ahead and talk about both Tamars because there's more than one Tamar in the Bible. You have the Tamar in the book of Genesis, who was expected to marry, have children, and to continue the family line. And it was important that they have sons. A woman without a husband or without children, they often had no financial security and had very little social value. After Tamar's husband died, their tradition required for his brother to marry her so that she could still have children and be provided for. But when that didn't happen, Tamar was basically denied protection, identity, and security. It was as if she wasn't even cared for, and she was basically being left with no future at all. Now you have the other Tamar that I mentioned that is in 2 Samuel. She was raped by her half brother. She was left silenced, unmarried, and many people saw her as damaged. And even though she was the king's daughter, King David himself, she had no real protection or justice. Then you have one of the most disturbing stories in the Bible, the Levite's concubine in the book of Judges, who was pushed outside by her own husband just to protect himself. She ended up getting gang raped throughout the night, and she was left for dead. What value did any of those men see in her? You had Dinah, who was raped by a Canaanite prince in the book of Genesis. You have Susanna, who was almost killed because of false accusations. You have the women of Jabesh Gilead that were taken and given as wives after violence. Then you had Lot's daughters who were offered up to the crowd of men trying to get to the angels. And then later on, because of the environment they grew up in and the things that they've witnessed and seen and have been around, after Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, those same girls who were offered up to the men got their own dad drunk so that they could get pregnant by him. In the Old Testament, many men had multiple women, and women were just supposed to obey. There just weren't many choices for them. And now let's fast forward to today. Many women feel like having control over their bodies helps protect from repeating history. It gives them the ability to make personal decisions, and it helps them feel more independent and like women today have more dignity than they had in the past. For most history, women didn't have control over their own bodies or lives. Many were forced into situations where they had no choice and suffered because of it. Now let's get to this subject of sin. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, then you already know that I've sinned. I sinned a lot. I can't count the amount of times I've sinned, whether it was me physically doing something or just thinking. I have sinned. I can say I was thankful to the Lord that I never got pregnant as I was growing up. I became sexually active with young boys at a very early age, and I remember how I would often hear about girls and even boys, them still being virgins. And it would break my heart when I found out they were no longer virgins or they couldn't wait until they got to marriage, because I always looked at myself in my own life and felt like I never got that opportunity because of what happened to me, and I would never get that opportunity. So again, I just felt like I didn't even get a chance to try to do it right. And I often wished that other people desired to wait, because although I didn't value myself, I wanted to feel valued. And having sex with a lot of guys wasn't enough for me to feel valued. I was just satisfying my fleshly desires of pleasure. I would often be surprised, as well as I got older in my teenage years, that I never became pregnant. With my ex-husband, before we were married, there were times where I questioned if it might happen, but I was always thankful that it didn't. And once we were married, I began to question if it was even possible. I had a situation where I had some very thick, dark discharge. And I know that my period wasn't due, and it was just constantly oozing out. I didn't understand what was going on. So, of course, I go to the doctor. And that's when I found out my hormones were imbalanced. And apparently they've been imbalanced for a while. because I was growing hair in some places I apparently wasn't supposed to be growing hair in. Nothing that other people really saw, but the doctor pointed out certain things and said it would have been best if I got looked at sooner. Well, they put me on birth control, and I was on it for a very long time. At least to me, it was definitely a long time. And once I ran out, and at that time I knew I didn't have insurance to keep paying for it either, but once I stopped taking it, it was as if my body was finally in the perfect conditions for having a baby, and I became pregnant. Well, although I was married, I felt like I was having a child out of wedlock. My marriage had already been through some of the worst scenarios it could go through as far as infidelity. And I was once again in a situation having to deal, with my husband being with another woman. And not only that, but I received a call from my sister letting me know that she was contacted about our earlier court case against our father that we lost, and how they wanted to reopen it because 2 more young girls were sexually abused by my father. And he was now in jail, and they needed a fighting chance for the young girls, and opening our case would help them. Well, at that point, I may have made progress in life, but I wasn't necessarily out of my dark place. I said, this world is evil. It's just too cruel. I don't even have a faithful husband. I'm pregnant, and I still feel like I'm having a child out of wedlock. And although I'm married, I still feel like an unmarried single parent. I started to fear life for the child that was inside of me. And out of fear, I said, I'm just going to end it because I'm already tired of this world. And I do not even want to fathom what this child will have to go through. Even when it comes to getting married and finding love, I was like, there's just no hope anywhere. And I try to abort my life. I try to end not only my life, but the child's life. I still do not regret that because I don't know what happened, but something snapped in a good way inside of me. People can call me crazy, I don't care, but it wasn't until that last attempt that I finally found a reason for life. Of course, in my spirit, I could feel the conviction of the Lord, of the Holy Spirit. He just convicted me, letting me know that I don't have a say in this child's life, no more than I had a say in my own life. Although I wanted to die several times, he didn't allow me to, and I could not take it upon myself to end the life of this child. Was I in the wrong? Yes, I was in the wrong because the child was innocent. And although I was in a situation where fear took over, I shouldn't have been doing what I was doing. But one thing's for certain is that I cannot and I will not let guilt convict me and keep me from living life. If anything, what other people would call out and try to shame me for, that was the best decision I could have made for me because the outcome was far different. I grew up in church and I've heard so much about, or should I say against, abortion, not really knowing all of the details of what in the world it even was. So I, at one point, of course, grew up agreeing abortion is wrong. Did it necessarily stop me from thinking about it? No. But I heard and saw that it was wrong. But the problem is we are using the wrong terms. When we hear about a lot of women's rights and the subject gets turned to abortion or contraceptions, we are quick to talk about how murdering is a sin. We are quick to talk about how God knitted us in our womb. We are quick to just mention whatever we can in the Bible to make sure people understand why it's wrong. But we're only looking at it in a sense of murder. What happens when a woman is in a terrible situation? Does she still have no right to make a choice? Birth control is not just about preventing pregnancy. Hormonal imbalance, painful or irregular periods, conditions like PCOS or endometriosis, preventing medical complications. It has so many different uses besides simply trying to stop yourself from getting pregnant. Abortion is not always about choice. Sometimes it's about survival. An ectopic pregnancy is life-threatening. That's when a fertilized egg implants outside of the uterus, usually in the fallopian tube. Usually that pregnancy cannot survive, and it can cause a tube to rupture, and it can lead to internal bleeding and death if it goes untreated. Sometimes the body does not fully pass a miscarriage, and there are medical procedures that need to be done to prevent infection and to protect the mother's health. There are severe health risks to mothers, conditions where continuing pregnancy could damage their organs or threaten mothers' lives. Situations where the baby cannot survive outside the womb, it could cause emotional trauma and put a mother at risk physically. A lot of times when it comes to some churches and you hearing a message, you often hear that if you make a particular vote that definitely supports abortion or so, you are agreeing to murder. And they're only looking at it again on the surface. What I hate is that people have taken the word life and the word health and switched it around when it comes to what abortion is. They want to say that they are aborting their duties or they shouldn't be going around having sex, like they should keep their legs closed. But the sad truth is they don't realize that they've given power to the wrong person. Is murdering wrong? Yes, it is a sin. It is a part of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. Although we often quote it, thou shalt not kill. But there was a lot of killing going on in the Bible. Why? Because it was okay to kill. It was okay to defend oneself, but it was not okay to murder. It was not okay to be like Cain trying to kill his brother Abel out of jealousy. Murder from a biblical standpoint means the intentional, premeditated, and unjustifiable taking of a human life, often fueled by malice or hatred, distinct from accidental killing or justified actions like self-defense or capital punishment. Because we wanted to ban abortion, because we wanted to prevent innocent children from being murdered, we have caused women to have to be in a life-threatening situation in order to be saved from serious health problems and health risks. Laws have been passed that make abortion a crime by default. And instead of it being used for standard medical options, it has become a crime unless a doctor can prove it fits into a specific exception. Meaning, unless a woman is about to die, they can't receive help. In many states, the exception isn't a permission slip. It's a legal defense. This means a doctor could still be charged with the crime and would have to have proved it in court that the patient was actually dying to avoid prison. The specific language used in these bans is what often excludes non-emergency medical needs. Many of these bans only allow women to get help to prevent them from dying. If a condition is only going to cause something like permanent organ damage or loss of fertility or extreme pain, but it's not going to kill the patient, then it's not going to be legally qualified for the doctor to perform anything. Some laws have been interpreted to mean the danger must be imminent, unavoidable, absolute. This leads to situations where doctors feel they must wait until a woman is at the absolute worst conditions ever, like waiting for signs of sepsis before they are legally safe to intervene on their behalf. It's because the laws are written by legislators instead of doctors that they often miss the deeper medical need. In some states, even if a fetus has a fatal condition and cannot survive, the mother might still have to be forced to carry it, the child, to term because her own life is not in danger yet. Pregnancy can worsen conditions like heart disease or cancer to a very dangerous extent. But because these aren't sudden emergencies, doctors may struggle to provide any kind of life-saving care earlier than when they're about to die. All that gets talked about is murdering the fetus. And it's sad that if the woman finds out that the baby is outside of the uterus, she can't get no help until she's about to die. It's sad that a woman could end up with permanent organ damage if it means that her life isn't in danger. Just because people want to label it as murder. In some of these cases, it's self-defense. How dare we tell that wife and that husband that because the wife's health is at risk and her life is in danger, they cannot abort the child because she will be murdering. And that husband may very well lose his wife and may rather adopt a child instead of losing the love of his life over what this risky situation is. Yes, there is nothing impossible for God, and He can do all things. But just because He can do all things doesn't mean He's always gonna do what we want. But do you know how many men have suffered because of having faith in God? And they put absolute faith in Him to change the situation. But because they felt like they were in the wrong, if they chose the other option, they lost their loved one. And in return, it caused them to turn away from God. Because He didn't do what they expected. And because what they believed they weren't supposed to do was considered such a great sin. Let's stop for a moment. Before I continue, I just want to check in. If anything I've said so far has stirred up difficult feelings, guilt, shame, confusion, please know you're not alone. I understand what it's like to believe something was your fault when it wasn't. To carry the weight of consequences you never deserved. It can take years to untangle those lies, and that's okay. If you need to pause, step away, or take a breath, please do. This space is for healing, not pressure. Come back when you're ready. I'll still be here. every sin has a different weight of consequences. But all sin is disobedience. Sin is sin. But it's even more important to know when you're actually sinning. When's the last time you lied to somebody? It could have been as simple as you trying to get out of something. And you're probably not making a great effort to make sure you don't do it again either. There are many examples in the Bible for a reason. There are many great people in the Bible who have sinned as examples for a reason. It's as if you cannot satisfy those who are holier than thou. They are the prideful ones who, instead of trying to lead you to Christ, only try to condemn you to hell. They only point out that you're going in the wrong direction without pointing you in the true direction. We can't just tell people they're going to hell without explaining why. God did not put any of us on this earth only to point out people's faults. First of all, I am here to tell you, God sees you. There is no way to justify if you have sinned. But just as Jesus defended the adulterous woman in the book of John, he will defend you on Judgment Day. You just have to choose Jesus over yourself. Sometimes people just always have something to say. They'll say how there are people who shouldn't be having children. They'll say instead of having abortions, you should just put them up for adoption. There are some people who will say it doesn't matter if you were raped or went through something traumatic. You should be able to handle stuff. But people are only that way until they have to face the situation for themselves. Only then do they truly end up seeing the bigger picture of things. Not necessarily to justify themselves, but in a way realizing how deeply wrong they were for being the way they were. There have been a lot of cases of child abuse. Those women gladly kept their children, yet there have been so many people who have grown up in abusive homes. Stopping abortion isn't necessarily changing the world when there are bigger things that needs to be addressed. Sure, you can throw abortion in with it, but there are so many horrible things going on today. Human trafficking, apparently the rich hunting people for sport, children growing up in abusive homes. I had a dream. It was like a documentary, and I could tell that there was child abuse that happened. As I watched a mother talking about her daughter and how strict she was on her since she was a child, and she was a single mother. And apparently she finally found love somewhere in the child's teenage years. And the child felt abandoned by her mother. I saw the child as a grown woman with her own baby. It was a beautiful baby boy. They both were dressed nicely. You wouldn't think that there was a problem, but I could see the anger on her face. She began to abuse the baby in a way that no one would even know it was happening. The baby was crying and she brought the baby outside along a little hill. She kind of plopped him onto the ground, just enough to kind of stop crying for just a brief moment. She was shaking him, pushing his head down to the ground. But it was never so much so that it would leave visible scars. And she kept picking him up and dropping him to the ground. Again, all this was like just enough to get away with it. When I approached her and asked her what is she doing, she said, "Oh, it's just a religious thing," as if she needed to get demons out of that baby. And she kept repeating the actions over and over again. In my dream, I tried to step to the baby's defense, also worrying that she could easily try to say that I'm trying to kidnap the child because there's no physical signs of abuse or violence on the baby. But what she was doing was clearly wrong. I questioned when I woke up, how do these children grow up? The woman clearly came from an abusive home and did the same thing to her child. Will that young man grow up to be a criminal or do the same thing his mother did to him to his child? There is so much going on in this world that does not get addressed. And I feel like instead of making things all about one subject, we need to hone in on so many evils that are happening in this world. You don't often hear churches talk about some of these serious things. We don't want children to necessarily hear more than they have to, but me thinking back on my childhood, even before I was sexually abused, man, I feel like the whole neighborhood would introduce you to information that you didn't need to know. I remember in second grade, a boy telling me to look and he had his dick out. I truly believe that sometimes talking about these things in church, even if you try to dial the language down a little bit, it may actually save some lives that are in the church. Because so much happens in the church and the people get away with it. Is murder a sin? Yes. Is abortion murder? It truly depends on how you are using it. Let us call sin what it is, but let us also be there to help people go in the right direction. If you have made a tough decision of aborting a child and you are consumed by guilt and shame, please know that that's not where God wants you to be. You can still be forgiven, but you also need to forgive yourself. Many women have died in childbirth. Many children have died in childbirth. Many women have aborted their children and not regretted anything. Many women have aborted their children and regretted it for the rest of their lives. Many women have aborted children and later found peace in Jesus. You have the right to do whatever you want with your body. But that's why it's important to gain a relationship with Christ, to get knowledge from His Word, and to not look at things from such a surface level. Get to know the Lord for yourself. And when you want to talk about things, study it and look it up. Understanding it would do you far better than just talking off of what you think you know. I hope you will join me next week as we continue down the little parable I created and we tackle the next subject about a transgender activist who shouted about the right to be recognized as the opposite sex. Until next time, please take care of yourself. Hold on a little longer because this is not the end of your story. And you, my sister, my brother, are deeply and unconditionally loved.